It happened in December 2021, in the quiet town of Linden Falls, Ohio. A place where winter arrived early and stayed late, where the streets whispered rather than spoke, and where kindness came not in grand gestures but in the soft, unnoticed rituals of everyday life. Mornings there smelled of old wood, newspapers, and coffee that had been brewed the same way for 20 years. Christmas lights hung from porches that creaked in the wind, even if no one bothered to plug them in. Martin and Carol Avery lived in a small 2-story house at the edge of Sycamore Street with their 10-year-old daughter, Ellie. She was the kind of child who rarely tied her shoes, kept her bangs uneven with blunt scissors, and carried a fascination with planets and moons that often made her quiet at dinner. Their days followed a gentle rhythm: work, school, groceries, laundry, weekends at the public library, where Ellie always picked the thickest book with the smallest print. Their life wasn't loud. It wasn't trying to be anything, and they weren't looking for more. The shelter sat at the far end of the industrial park, modest, drafty, run by people who believed in doing what they could with what little they had. On that cold afternoon, Martin had only meant to drop off a box of dog food for a neighbor who was moving. He had planned to stay 5 minutes, but the barking stopped him. Or rather, the absence of barking, a silence that felt heavy. He followed it, not knowing why. The dog was in the last crate on the left, a German shepherd, or mostly one, with black fur dulled by dirt and matted in places where dried blood had stiffened his coat. His front paw was wrapped in gauze that had turned the color of rust. One ear was torn, swollen, misshapen. His eyes, though, were quiet, not pleading, not afraid. Just tired in a way Martin recognized, the way a man might look at himself in the mirror after too many nights of pretending he slept well. He was told the dog had been found on the side of Route 19, lying in a ditch surrounded by shards of broken taillights and scraps of paper. No one claimed him, no microchip, no collar. Just a piece of plastic embedded in his rear paw and a slow, steady heartbeat that refused to stop. He hadn't barked once since they brought him in. He hadn't eaten, hadn't lifted his head for anyone, as if he'd already learned not to expect anything. Martin didn't plan to take him, not consciously, but the moment he crouched in front of the crate and the dog looked at him, just looked, without blinking, something gave way. A small, stubborn thread of silence unspooled between them. He signed the temporary foster forms without speaking, hands steady, heart somewhere else. They named him Cooper. It wasn't a discussion. The name just appeared, quiet and simple, as if it had always been his. When they brought him home, he didn't resist. He didn't explore. He simply stepped over the threshold and lay down in the hallway, pressing his side against the wall like he needed the solidity of something that wouldn't move. For the first 2 days, he ate nothing, drank only when the house was still. When footsteps came near, he closed his eyes, not in fear, but like someone waiting for the moment to pass. Ellie left him toys, one by one: a tennis ball, a cloth star, a tiny astronaut from a cereal box. He never touched them, but he didn't push them away either. Carol set a folded blanket beside the kitchen where the floor caught afternoon light. Cooper lay there for hours, unmoving, eyes half closed, breathing soft and careful, like he was still unsure he'd been allowed to come back to the world. He didn't make a sound, not a growl, not a whimper. He simply existed in the spaces between, a shadow that cast no threat, a wound that hadn't decided if it would close. And yet, somehow, even in his silence, the house began to change. The television played at lower volume. Slippers padded more softly across the hardwood. The clock ticking in the dining room sounded louder now, not because the house was quieter, but because they were listening. No one said it, but they all felt it. Something had come into their home that wasn't asking to be noticed, but would change everything by simply staying. The house began to shift around Cooper, slowly, like water making space for a new stone. Nothing dramatic changed. No declarations, no rules rewritten, just small things, quiet choices that accumulated day by day. The television played at a lower volume. Doors were closed with softer hands. Conversations were shorter in the evening, as if the silence had become sacred. Carol laid out an old plaid blanket in the warmest corner of the living room, the one that caught the mid-morning light through the thin curtains. A ceramic bowl was placed nearby, filled with boiled chicken and rice, not because he demanded it, but because she couldn't bear to feed him anything less. Cooper didn't rush toward it. He approached it in increments, sniffed it, circled it, then ate with the slow restraint of a creature still unsure of kindness. Ellie had begun reading to him. Not for his benefit at first. She simply didn't want to stop her bedtime ritual. Her books were dog-eared paperbacks with glittery covers and curling corners. She read about galaxies, about explorers lost in the dark, about stars that kept shining even when no one could see them. Cooper lay nearby, eyes open but unmoving, absorbing the sound like it was rainfall. He never shifted or twitched when she turned a page. He just listened. Carol found a box in the attic one afternoon, filled with old toys belonging to their last dog, Rusty, a retriever with a grin that never left his face. She dusted off the fabric duck, the rope with frayed ends, the squeaky moon that hadn't squeaked in years. She placed them, one by one, in the corner where Cooper slept. He didn't react. Not at first. But he didn't push them away either. Sometimes, after everyone had gone to bed, one of the toys would be in a new place come morning. Cooper didn't bark. He didn't whine or growl. He rarely made a sound. But the house began to arrange itself around his silence, like a family adjusting to a clock that ticks differently. He moved softly from room to room, never entering spaces uninvited, never staying long in any one place. It was as though he was still waiting for permission to exist. Then came the night Ellie forgot to close her bedroom door. It was late, long past the time her reading light usually blinked off. The house had gone still, the kind of stillness that comes only when every breath inside has settled. Cooper had been curled on his usual spot in the hallway, but something made him rise. Not a noise, not a call, just an opening. He walked slowly, paused soundless on the wood, until he reached the edge of her doorway. Inside, the room was cast in soft shadows, dotted with glow-in-the-dark stars and paper planets strung from the ceiling. Ellie was asleep on her side, one arm tucked beneath her cheek, her book face down beside her. Cooper stepped in. He moved without urgency, without hesitation. He crossed the rug that covered most of the floor and settled beside her bed. Then he lowered his head to the carpet and placed his muzzle near her outstretched hand. Not touching, just near, close enough to feel her warmth, close enough to feel the rhythm of another breathing thing. He didn't sleep, not immediately. He kept his eyes half open, as if guarding something fragile. The room was quiet in the way only a child's room can be, full of unsaid things, of dreams floating between furniture, of hope left on the windowsill. In that stillness, something shifted, not in Ellie, not in the house, in him. He didn't move until dawn. When Carol passed by in the early morning to rouse Ellie for school, she found them like that. One child still half dreaming, one dog wide awake, but still. There was no explanation, no ceremony. She didn't wake them, just stood at the doorway for a long moment, then turned away with something soft curling behind her ribs. That night marked a quiet turning. Cooper didn't begin wagging his tail or jumping at shadows. He didn't become something he wasn't, but he began to return, inch by inch, to the surface of his own life, not to seek affection, not to ask for more, but to make sure that when someone was alone, he could simply be there. No noise, no claim, just presence. It happened on the morning of January 12th. The sky was flat with cold, a pale gray that looked rubbed out by winter's hand. The town of Linden Falls lay silent, its streets powdered with frost, its houses tucked in under heavy stillness. Inside the Avery home, nothing stirred. The furnace hummed, the pipes sighed. The clock blinked 4:27. All was normal. Then Cooper stood up. Not with a start, not with panic, just a slow, deliberate motion, as if something inside him had switched from sleep to listening. His body was quiet, his ears tuned forward. There was no sound to chase, no movement to track. But he moved. First to the kitchen. His paws barely made a sound across the tile, but he moved with purpose. He paused by the refrigerator, nose lifted, breathing slow. Then he crossed to the far wall where the baseboard met the floor vent. He stayed there for a few long seconds, then turned, not confused, decided. He padded down the hallway, past the stairwell, and stopped in front of the utility room door. The space beyond it held the water heater, the furnace, the gas line. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then twice. His muscles stiffened, his eyes sharpened. His body didn't flinch, but something in him recoiled. He raised one paw and touched the door, then again, then harder. At first, the scraping was soft, a gentle scratching that barely registered against the thick quiet of early morning. But it grew. With every second, the pressure increased. Claws dragged against painted wood. Again, until red lines bloomed at the edge of his nails. Still, no one stirred. He turned, sprinted down the hall. The bedroom door was shut. Without hesitation, he rose on his hind legs and clawed at it, his weight pushing the hinges with each impact. When that failed, he pushed his shoulder into it, once, twice. The third time it gave way. Inside, the room was dim, the air heavy with warmth from layered blankets. Martin slept on his back, one arm thrown over the covers, his breath steady, unaware. Cooper leapt, first onto the bed, then onto Martin's chest. It was the first time. The man gasped, jarred awake by the sudden weight and the tremble of fur against him. He sat up, blinking, hands half raised in confusion. Cooper didn't move. His body shook. Not from cold, but from something deeper, something urgent. His nose pointed toward the door, eyes fixed, unblinking. Then he turned and looked directly at Martin. It wasn't panic in his gaze. It was insistence. Martin slid out of bed, feet finding the cold floor, his body sluggish with sleep. He moved toward the hallway with Cooper pressed to his side. The dog stopped at the corner, refusing to let him pass until Martin looked up, inhaled, and understood. The smell hit like a wall. Not faint, not uncertain. It was sharp and metallic, a clawing presence that scraped the back of the throat. Gas. Martin's breath caught. He turned back toward the bedroom, heart pounding now. He moved quickly, first to Carol, then Ellie. He didn't speak, just shook shoulders, pointed. The three of them, blankets still clinging to their arms, feet bare, were ushered outside into the pre-dawn cold. Cooper led. They stood on the porch, breath visible in the frigid air. Carol wrapped herself around Ellie. Martin called the emergency line with shaking hands. Across the street, not a single light blinked on. The world remained quiet. Inside, the house still held its breath. Within minutes, headlights cut through the fog. A utility truck pulled up. Men moved with focused urgency. Readings confirmed the leak. A malfunctioning valve. A slow, invisible danger building beneath their feet. They said the gas had reached the ignition threshold. They said another hour would have been too late. Cooper stood to the side, unmoving, eyes on the house as if guarding it even now. His breath came in shallow huffs, but his stance was firm. He hadn't barked. He hadn't panicked. He had acted. And that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment. Do you believe animals have a soul? Don't forget to hit the bell. More true and touching stories are coming soon. They left the house in under 4 minutes. No shoes, no plan. Just instinct. Carol wrapped Ellie in a quilt, still warm from sleep. Martin grabbed his coat on the way out, but didn't stop to put it on. Ellie clutched her book, the one about galaxies and moons, held tightly under her arm like it mattered more than anything else. Cooper moved ahead of them all. He didn't pause. He didn't look back. He led, down the hallway, through the front door, across the frozen porch where frost clung to the railing like breath. His steps were steady, his ears tilted back, not in fear, but in focus. It wasn't panic. It was precision. Like he understood exactly what needed to happen. Only once they were outside, bare feet touching cold ground, breath coming fast, did he stop. At the edge of the driveway, Cooper turned and sat. The others stood behind him, clustered in the dark, blinking against the sharp cold and the sudden flood of awareness. He didn't look at them. His gaze stayed fixed on the house, still, waiting. The street remained quiet. The sky was starting to pale at the edges, thin strokes of dawn behind the trees. A neighbor's porch light flickered on in the distance, unaware. Then it came, a muffled sound, not an explosion, not the fireball they had imagined in their nightmares, just a low, heavy thump, deep in the bones of the earth, like the house had sighed. The porch rattled. The windows trembled in their frames. A ripple passed through the frozen ground, brief and blunt. No flames followed, no smoke. Inside, a pressure release had triggered, just enough to shift the air, just enough to shake the silence. The gas company, already en route, arrived minutes later. Readings showed what Cooper had already known. The leak had come from an old valve tucked behind the furnace. It had been slow, almost invisible. A buildup barely detectable until it reached the edge. They said the timing was close. Too close. Had they waited even 5 more minutes, the result might have been different. The ignition point wasn't far. A spark from the fridge motor, a click of the thermostat, anything could have lit it. But none of that happened. Because Cooper had moved first. After the house was cleared, after the crew shut off the line and aired out the rooms, the family stood at the threshold. The front door hung open, but no one stepped inside right away. The air was sharp, tinged with something sour that lingered at the edges. It was no longer dangerous, but it wasn't quite right either. The home they had known now felt unfamiliar. The living room, once full of soft corners and quiet routines, now held the memory of something that almost was. The scent of gas clung to the fabric, to the wood, to the walls themselves. The silence inside wasn't restful anymore. It was hollow. The specialists worked for hours. Fans, vents, a purge of every pipe. Every space was scrubbed, aired, reassured. But the house didn't feel like home until much later. Not until Ellie left her book on the armchair again. Not until Carol turned on the kettle and filled the room with the scent of mint tea. Not until Martin laid Cooper's blanket back in its corner and waited. Cooper stepped inside last. He moved slowly, nose to the floor, checking each space like it might have changed shape. When he reached his spot near the kitchen, he sat, looked once at the front door, and then rested his chin on his paws. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence. It was earned. After that night, Cooper was no longer just the dog they had taken in. He became theirs, not in the way people claim ownership, but in the way a home stretches itself around someone and says, "You belong here." They didn't call him a hero. That word never came up. Instead, they called him the one who stayed, the one who felt it, the one who didn't let go. Carol bought him a new collar. Not flashy, not bright. Deep forest green, with brass hardware and a soft inner lining. The tag didn't say Cooper on one side and their phone number on the other. It said, in quiet block letters, "He hears what we don't." Ellie started drawing him in the margins of her school notebooks. Not as a regular dog, but as something more. A guardian satellite circling quiet planets. A silent presence in orbit, always watching. Sometimes he wore a cape, sometimes a helmet. But always, always his eyes were steady. Carol began baking again, not for guests or holidays, just for him. She made small pumpkin biscuits shaped like stars and kept them in a glass jar on the counter. Every now and then, she would pass one to Cooper without a word, and he would take it gently, as if understanding it came from a place deeper than hunger. Martin added something to his mornings. After pouring his coffee and checking the news, he'd put on his boots, no matter the weather, and take Cooper into the backyard. The walks weren't long, sometimes just to the tree line and back, but they were quiet, steady steps in the snow or the frost, and Martin never rushed them. He talked to him sometimes, not loud, just enough to fill the space between breaths. There were still moments when Cooper flinched in his sleep. A sound, a shift in the air, a memory he couldn't explain. He would curl tighter, his body trembling for just a second, and then go still again. Sometimes his ears would twitch as if listening for something he didn't want to hear. No one tried to wake him. No one called his name. They just waited. And he always came back. Every night, just after Ellie brushed her teeth and turned out the lights, Cooper would walk down the hallway and settle by her door. Not inside, never past the threshold, just close enough. He'd lie there, facing the room, his body still but alert. He wouldn't move again until her breath slowed and deepened, until sleep settled like dust on everything. Then he'd rest his head on his paws and close his eyes. Sometimes, when the wind howled against the windows or the pipes shifted in the walls, his ears would lift. He'd scan the dark, then lower them again. Not because he was guarding, but because he was remembering what it meant to stay. By spring, the house felt cleaner. Not just in the way windows caught more sun or the floors stayed swept longer, but in the way the air itself seemed to breathe easier. The rooms no longer carried the scent of something almost lost. Instead, they held warmth, quiet joy, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but lingers in corners, waiting to be noticed. Laughter came back in pieces, not loud, not constant, but real. Ellie left books open in the living room again, sometimes with a pencil tucked between the pages. Carol hummed while cooking. Martin fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door. No one talked about that night unless they had to, but the memory of it moved with them, gentle and steady, like Cooper's heartbeat at their feet. It wasn't fear anymore, not worry, just presence. The awareness that something had happened, and it mattered. That a decision had been made, by instinct, by love, by something deeper than either, and it had changed everything. Cooper never sought attention. He didn't linger in the spotlight when neighbors stopped by. He didn't wear the collar with the tag for show. He never stood taller or waited for praise. Instead, he stayed close. He watched faces, and when someone's smile didn't quite reach their eyes, he moved a little nearer, laid his head against a knee, sat without sound. He didn't need to know what was wrong. He just needed to be there. One evening, when the sky was gold and the windows glowed with it, Ellie sat on the rug near the bookshelf, her knees pulled to her chest. The day had been long, her shoulders heavy with a sadness she didn't name. Cooper wandered over, his steps so slow, deliberate. She looked at him and whispered, almost to herself, "Why did you stay?" There was no answer, just the rustle of his paws against the carpet, the soft exhale as he lay beside her and rested his head gently on her lap. She didn't repeat the question. She didn't need to, because that was the answer. He stayed because he felt something, because something in this house, in these people, had called to the part of him that had once been broken. And instead of running from it, he had chosen to remain, not out of duty, not out of training, but out of knowing. There were no words in that moment, no lessons, no grand realizations, just a girl, a dog, and a sunlit room holding them both. Sometimes healing doesn't shout. It doesn't arrive with ceremony. Sometimes it moves in quietly, finds a spot beside you, and rests. Sometimes it's not in what is said, but in what is understood. Cooper stayed, and in that small act of choosing, he gave them all something they hadn't known they needed. Not protection, not rescue, but light. A soft, steady light that started deep inside and spread quietly, gently to everyone around him. The kind of light that stays,